Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Exodus 20, 8-11. Hello, welcome to Geekdom of God. I'm your host, Santir, and today I'm going to talk about the Fourth Commandment. I want to begin this discussion by looking at the history of the Sabbath, starting all the way back at the beginning, when the concept was first introduced in Genesis 2, 2-3. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. The idea of working 6 days and resting the seventh is first introduced here, but it isn't formally instituted until the Ten Commandments are issued, though there is some aspect of it introduced for the manna collection in Exodus 16. While there are many lessons to be learned from the provision of manna, especially the initial period, it is somewhat ancillary to this discussion. If you're curious about it, though, I do recommend you check out Exodus 16 yourself. Anyway, God instituted the Sabbath in the Ten Commandments, and further refined procedures for following this commandment throughout the law, both later on in Exodus, see chapters 31 and 35, as well as in Leviticus, see chapter 23. The basic mandate of the Sabbath was that it was a day on which no work was to be done. In this way, it was not to be treated like any other day, but was instead supposed to be a special day of both rest from work and assembly before God, as stated in Leviticus 23:3. There are 6 days when you may work, but the seventh day is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. You're not to do any work, wherever you live. It is a Sabbath to the Lord. It was also to be a day of sacrifice, as regular sacrifices on the Sabbath were instituted in Numbers 28, 9-10. On the Sabbath day, make an offering of 2 lambs a year old without defect, together with its drink offering and a grain offering of 2/10 of an ephah of the finest flour, mixed with olive oil. This is the burnt offering for every Sabbath, in addition to the regular burnt offering and its drink offering. This policy was to be taken extremely seriously, as the penalty for working on the Sabbath day was severe, as stated in Exodus 31:14. Observe the Sabbath, because it is holy to you. Anyone who desecrates it is to be put to death. Those who do any work on that day must be cut off from their people. Further, this commandment extended beyond just the Israelites. It included everyone living in their lands, as well as their animals. This is stated in the Fourth Commandment itself, in Exodus 20, 8-11, and is reiterated in Deuteronomy 5, 13-14. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. From this, we can see that this law is to grant a rest to everyone, not just some subset of people. There were a lot of consequences to this national day of rest, of doing no work. The biggest one was the need to prepare everything needed for the Sabbath day on the day prior, which came to be known as Preparation Day as a result. This would include things like preparing food, gathering supplies, and any other work that needed to be done so that everyone could enjoy the Sabbath rest. Further, all businesses had to be closed for the day because no one was allowed to work on that day. Not even foreigners were permitted to work, nor could employers or slave owners require their employees or slaves to work. This was the law. And like most of the law, the people of Israel were absolutely lousy at obeying it. Nehemiah 13, 16-18 tells us about this failure from the perspective of the exiles returning from Babylon. People from Tyre who lived in Jerusalem were bringing in fish and all kinds of merchandise and selling them in Jerusalem on the Sabbath to the people of Judah. I rebuked the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What is this wicked thing you are doing, desecrating the Sabbath day? Didn't your ancestors do the same things, so that our God brought all this calamity on us and on this city? Now you're stirring up more wrath against Israel by desecrating the Sabbath." The book of the prophets are therefore filled with calls to keep the Sabbath and treat it as holy, such as in Jeremiah 17, 24-25. "But if you are careful to obey me, declares the Lord, and bring no load through the gates of this city on the Sabbath, but keep the Sabbath day holy by not doing any work on it, then kings who sit on David's throne will come through the gates of this city with their officials. They and their officials will come riding in chariots and on horses, accompanied by the men of Judah and those living in Jerusalem, and this city will be inhabited forever." However, Amos 8, 3-6 reveals the corrupt heart of this people. "In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, the songs in the temple will turn to wailing. Many, many bodies, flung everywhere. Silence." Hear this, you who trample the needy, and do away with the poor of the land, saying, When will the new moon be over, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended, that we may market wheat? Skimping on the measure, boosting the price and cheating with dishonest scales, buying the poor with silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals, selling even the sweepings with the wheat. And so, this is the Old Testament picture of the Sabbath. Something that was holy to God, which his people, the Israelites, often despised at best and disregarded at worst, if they even observed it at all. This wasn't always the case, of course, but the Bible gives evidence that it was common, especially the closer one gets to the Assyrian exile of the northern kingdom and the Babylonian exile of the southern kingdom during the Split Kingdoms period. That brings us to the New Testament. Let's take a look at how Jesus treats the Sabbath in Matthew 12, 1-14. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. He answered, Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath, and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Going on from that place, he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? He said to them, If any of you has a sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. This is a huge tonal shift. What on earth happened to cause such a change? The answer is, at least in part, the rise of the Pharisees. We often think of the Pharisees as the antagonists of the New Testament, but it is important to remember how they got into that position. They were a group of religious enthusiasts who actually cared about obeying the Mosaic Law. They rose to power during the intertestamental period and had a huge impact on Jewish culture and society. The Pharisees were a significant part of the scholarly and religious elite. The result of their influence was a Jewish culture that was well instructed in the Mosaic Law. The problem that arose, and how they are relevant to this discussion of the Fourth Commandment, is that they developed a sort of hyper-religiosity. They were experts in pursuing self-righteousness, and in this pursuit they twisted and added to God's commands. This happens due to the continual call for clarity. This is something that happens with legalism, where people want an ever more definitionally precise understanding of right and wrong according to the rules, especially religious ones. In this case, what likely happened was that the Pharisees wanted to have a specific and precise understanding of what work was according to the Fourth Commandment, so that they could understand what people weren't supposed to do more accurately. This stems from the gray areas and an uncertainty of what is okay and what isn't. As scholars, they would ask questions such as, how far must one walk before it becomes work? And then they'd find for themselves an answer to that question, then impose that answer as a matter of law. This sort of practice is what we see Jesus talk about in the previously quoted passage, and it accounts for the difference in approach that God had when interacting with the religiously anemic Israelites leading up to the exiles versus the hyper-religious Pharisees. As Jesus states in Mark 2:27, Then he said to them, The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Pharisees had twisted the purpose of the Sabbath from freeing humans from their usual daily work to a burden and enslavement of careful obedience to human regulations. Jesus corrected this view. Research today has shown how important rest from work is. We know that working too much degrades performance, by both reducing productivity and increasing errors made. God already knew this, and it is likely at least a part of why he instituted the Sabbath. It's not unlike a weightlifter who has to give their muscles breaks between workouts to recover and build themselves back up. Today, Christians tend to have a less strict relationship with the Sabbath than the Mosaic Law instructs. This seems fine to me. However, we would do well to remember the reason the Sabbath was instituted, and we should not dismiss it. God gave it to us for a reason. The point of the Sabbath is to give people a break from the endless effort and churn of life. In this day and age, the idea of doing that, of having a special day set aside each week, is still a valuable one. It is a day to have a different routine, to do things differently. It is a day to recharge, to focus on relationships, and to pursue God and recreation. It is a day to use ourselves differently than we usually use ourselves throughout the week. It is a day to disconnect from work and to lay those burdens down. It is a day to enjoy life. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care everyone. Bye-bye! Thank you for listening to this week's Geekdom of God podcast. To support this program, go to patreon.com/Ciantier. For more, you can visit geekdomofgod.com. Finally, you can email Ciantier at geekdomofgod.com.